Welcome back, everyone. And now it's time for our next discussion of the event. On the topic of predictions for the future of AR and VR innovations, we have our next group of panelists who will share their views on what lies ahead in virtual reality. Let's hear it for Thomas Quilty, CEO and Tech Advisor of BD Consulting and Investigations, Satish Ramakrishnan, CEO and Co-founder of The Qube, Vincent W. Allen, Managing Director of VAAV Industries, and Adam Kyle Wilson, Founder and CEO of Polyform Design Studio, Inc. Panelists, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to this panel discussion. I'm Satish Ramakrishnan, and I'll be moderating this discussion with distinguished panelists here. I'll just start with my own introduction and pass it on to the others. I am CEO and co-founder of The Qube, where we build AI-powered virtual spaces for more human interactions. I also run a startup studio called Venture Bay Labs, where we look for founders with great ideas to change the world. I've been in the corporate industry for about 25 years before that, starting as a developer up to a CTO before I left. And during that time, I built AR and VR solutions for law enforcement and governments. I also coach, mentor executives and leaders. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Quilty. I have a number of different roles. My current role is as Chief Security Officer for I'm a Team. I'm also a tech advisor for several different tech startups and part-time consultant with the different corporations and building out artificial reality products.
Hi there, guys. Vincent Allen here. I'm founder and managing director of VAAV Industries. Like all of us, I've held many roles over the course of time. I started working in the media and broadcast space roughly 30 years ago, so I've seen and been a part of the evolution from the early days of live streaming when it was mostly universities streaming out to military personnel who were deployed or whatever, leveraging things like Windows Media, codec, and real time, real player, and these kinds of things. And so see the evolution. My company VAAV, what we specialize in is the gray area, that space between traditional broadcast film and TV production, AV/IT integration, all the conference room stuff, how you get those things to play nice together to get it to the cloud, to a streaming service, but then how you build that into a digital transformation effort where if someone wants to take all of that and throw it on their intranet, she'll throw it on a SharePoint somewhere. So we do a lot of that kind of work and starting to see people asking for things like AR and VR, mostly without them really understanding what any of that means, but we'll get to that.
Hey everyone, I'm Adam Wilson. I'm one of the founders and CEO at Polyform Studio. We're an Emmy award-winning AR, VR design and development studio. We do all types of AR and VR builds for big enterprises and brands like the Olympics and Red Bull and Nike and things like this, and as well work with a lot of early stage startups to get new tech products into market in the AR and VR space.
Okay, honored to be here with all of you. A lot of experience here in AR and VR, so let's get right in. I think something that people ask and do not quite understand is the differences between some of these terms. AR, VR, MR, XR. Can we start off just with definitions very quickly? Tom?
Okay, I can talk a little bit about AR since that seems to be a lot of what I seem to be focused on. But that is just basically, if you look out in the room now, it's just an overlay. It's just an information overlay of what you see in front of you.
That's fair. I'll talk a little about XR. We're working on some cool XR stuff. I want to partner with my work on a product called XR Mirage. You talk about XR, you think about green screen technology, and nowadays everyone knows what a green screen is and what it does and how Hollywood or broadcasters use that. And what you can do with the XR Mirage or any of these kind of XR platforms is take the green screen and then composite that person into a fully digital world that's created and realized in something like Unreal Engine or similar technologies, so that any one of us can be sitting here on this panel 1 minute, and then the panel can be happening on Mars or, anywhere else, right? In an instant, and allowing us to be immersively placed into these worlds, and then we output that to wherever the heck we want to output it. Maybe you just are shooting and recording it, and it's going to go on a film or a television program that's going to be broadcast later, or maybe you pipe that out into a more traditional system, and then that ends up streaming out live on YouTube or wherever you want to stream it. And so instead of sitting on a panel in front of a step and repeat, we're, in the New York Stock Exchange circa 1890 or anywhere else, right?
So that leaves VR for me, which is essentially just replacing your reality with a virtual one, placing you in some type of virtual world. And this is, I think, what people are most familiar with headsets like the Quest Pro and all of, Meta's headsets and the Oculus and stuff.
Okay, thank you. So now let's start with very high-level predictions for where we are and where we are going. Tom, you've worked in consulting, training, applications. So you've seen the space through a really wide-angle lens. Could you give your thoughts on where do you see us right now and where things are going in the AR/VR space?
Wow, it's exploding across, as I think the other panelists will tell you. And my focus just on the AR side is trying to figure out how to integrate AR, but without taking away and distracting so much that it endangers the person using it. And that's sort of the area where I do a lot of consulting on using it as a tool, but not completely replacing the reality, so that the person still has situational awareness.
I think that, and we talked about this in the run-up to this panel, is that in the broadcast space, which is my expertise, is you see things that are used by the big budget, the CNNs of the world, the NBCs, BBCs of the world. If you go back to the 90s and you look, we talked about this on a call last week, the Kosovo conflict, right? You were seeing, these reporters with these helmets, with these antennas, and they were broadcasting live from, whatever, territory or war zone, and that was functionally, RMTP was how they were sending that. And now everybody does it. Everyone does it, has it on their phone. And so you look at that as a litmus in terms of what's coming or what could possibly be built, is that look at what all the big broadcasters are doing, look at what large meeting centers are doing, and that's all going to push into the corporate meeting space, right? And so we are seeing people wanting to use things like AR and VR to walk through a conference center build or an architecture build before you spend any money on it. My predilection is to think that you are going to see conference rooms built on mobile tech as opposed to hard mounted screens and microphones and cables. And what that looks like is a set of AR glasses, not unlike what we see in the movie The Kingsman, where you put the glasses on and you see everybody. It's sort of a holographic kind of thing in a HUD, right? And so for me, I think that's where we're headed, is minimizing spend on large infrastructure in those kinds of settings where you can have a correspondent in another country have a headset or something on, and they can see what they need to see, camera embedded in the frames, and really change the way we do things from both a content and media creation standpoint, but also from how we just do simple meetings, right? Is how we do basic everyday things. Everyone's on a Zoom or a WebEx how many times a day? If we could minimize Zoom fatigue by having a pair of glasses we could wear or whatever, how beneficial would that be for our mental health, much less just a company's bottom line? That's where I think we're going.
For sure, yeah. Just, I think we're in a really interesting inflection point for AR and VR, XR, MR, all the different Rs, that we're getting into, we're past the exponential curve into consumer adoption for the first time. And a lot of people look at VR and be like, oh, we've had it since the 80s, and AR has kind of been around. Google Glass came out, it was a failure, but we didn't have any of the infrastructure in terms of hardware in people's pockets or on their faces or 5G or any of the things we needed to really live up to people's expectations of what they saw in the movies, of having that seamless Iron Man kind of heads-up display where I can just speak to an AI and it can do some type of thing for me, or the VR experiences we see in like the Matrix and stuff like that. These are like the bars of excellence that consumers expect, and the products up until now haven't been able to deliver on. But with like the Apple Vision Pro coming out, and even like Meta's new headsets are getting crazier and crazier, and then combined with 5G, all of a sudden I think we're going to start to see really high adoption rates, and then eventually like mass adoption before the end of the decade for sure.
So if I can follow up with you, Adam, really quick about the Apple's product, for example. I was reading recently that they're not going to mass roll it out. It's going to be like appointment driven or whatever. Now, do you think, as someone who is very well entrenched in the VR space, that is it the iPhone or is it the Newton? Because Apple has a history of being 15 minutes too early, right? And doing something like we saw that with the HomePod. Everyone's got an Alexa or a Google Home or Siri on their iPhone, but trying to charge $600, $700 for a beamforming speaker that can talk to you. Everyone's got beamforming now. It was revolutionary 10 years ago. Now it's in the sphere down the block, right? So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, Apple does what they always do, which is come out with like the best version of a thing way after everybody else does. And sometimes it's a little ahead, sometimes it's a little behind. I think personally they came out at the exact right time to come out with what it is, which is a dev kit. It's for developers, it's for enthusiasts, it's not for the mass market. It's to build new, they're going to need that killer app still, right, to hit mass market. And they don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. They need people building on it. That's what this first generation is all going to be about, is like basically just a really great dev kit and an experience that opens people's minds to what the future could be, because everything they've seen so far doesn't live up to the expectations. And this, I think, is going to be mostly about just like getting the public excited, securing their place in the race ahead of everybody else with the silicone and all the other great things they're doing, and maybe like 4 generations from now making the iPhone version.
Right, and that was what I was going to ask, is because it doesn't seem like they've demonstrated interest in building the critical pathways that they need in terms of like a marketplace and the things that they did around the App Store, iTunes Store, whatever. And if that's not there, then I mean it's Meta, right? Which basically looks like Wii Olympics, right? It's not the render. They haven't built the render tech into it on the Meta side to do anything that honestly doesn't suck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's actually a real big difference, because like when the iPhone came out, the App Store didn't come out for another year. The studio I was working at the time, we shipped 7 of the first 25 apps, and there was only 25 apps that were first released, and then there was 100 released in the first month or something. Anything that runs on OS X or runs on an iPad now is going to be Vision Pro compatible from day one. So it's launching with thousands of apps, and anything that's been made with their AR kit or like Reality Kit is going to be AR enabled from day one. So they're not going to be optimized for the headsets, but it's going to give people a lot of cool stuff to do right off the bat.
And then as a follow-on to this, just for the future, we'll talk about it later in our panel. It says the use of AR, VR, MR, XR, all of these in training and how people are doing their job. It's going to be more and more commonplace.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. If you look at any technology, there is a hype cycle, right? So it went up a little bit last year, calling it metaverse and such, right? So what I want to point out is everything AR, VR, XR is not metaverse, right? So definitely with what we hear about the metaverse, all of these technologies are not gone. And right now there's a gold rush towards AI, but again, it's not separate. We are at a point where we've been 2D for a long time. The web is becoming 3D. And AR, VR, XR, MR, these are here to stay, and that's going to change. Also, these are the technologies that AI will build on, and also benefit back from AI. And so that's where we are going. And definitely, it's going to be very strong in the future. So let's move on to some opportunities and real world, or should I say virtual world use cases. So Tom, you have done a lot of work around managing distractions, and I believe that technology shouldn't be an enabler and not come in the way. So what are your thoughts on using AR and VR in some real world, virtual world use cases.
I see that the future's bright if you want to get into that industry. As a former Army guy and law enforcement, those are two of the main areas that have a direct need for this, especially on the AR, to be able to add that extra level of information, but doing it without distraction. And that was a couple of projects I've consulted on. Was specifically that is where it's a shot spotter and it spots where it is, and the R&D crew wanted to just immediately zoom in on where the shot was coming, and I said no, because the person's got to respond and protect themselves, whether than the military or law enforcement. They've got to take action and protect themselves first and protect others before they start responding. And so it's wide open for training field in both the AR, the MR, XR, and VR.
One of the interesting things, just to piggyback on Tom with AR, and again, we talked about this the other day, there are already products on the market that are very niche, but that have camera embedded in it, and you see things, we talked about this, but use cases for mechanical engineering, high tension, electrical work, where you need to consult with the emeritus guy in whatever field that is the guy, right? And so there's all those applications for that where you maybe don't need a senior guy all the time, but you might need to consult with a senior guy to be able to have hands on site in just a technical capacity and just have someone talking you through how to do whatever. And I believe very strongly that is where we're going in terms of a stopgap until we get the overall systems developed where you have that plus a really good quality HUD and the appropriate processing power, which I think is where the AI comes in, is to be able to give you that data in real time and then decide what data is important right now, right? Depending on what your line of work is. If you're a police officer, that looks different. If you are like I said, an electrician, that might look very different in terms of what data you're looking for. And so I think that's something that's rapidly coming. Like it's right on us, in my opinion.
Adam, your thoughts?
Oh yeah. I mean, all those great examples. Training for sure is like one of the most obvious ones. We're already, have been working with HoloLens back in the day, and like they made a big pivot that was enterprise focused, basically just for training, and they were too early. But now, with the Vision Pro especially, set up for training so well, super mobile, super ergonomic for people to use at length, which is required if you're training somebody to do something that's complicated. But then media, I think, is one of the biggest things, and this is kind of, Apple's positioning this headset as kind of a media consumption and laptop replacement kind of a tool. And I think that's really smart because, media is always one of the things that drives adoption of new technology. And with these new immersive mediums like VR storytelling or, AR enhanced 2D, video and stuff, like Disney just released this thing where you're watching this Disney movie, and if you bring up your camera, it has this AR waterfall that comes out of the screen, and the scene kind of goes around your living room and stuff. And it's just opening the doors for these whole new media experiences that people have never had before. And like the Vision Pro's got the 3D camera, so you can capture 3D images and film, and then kind of step back into that moment in time and look around the kitchen and stuff. And I think it's these media consumption experiences that are going to create like the emotional connection that we need for people to use it often. And then, just to touch on like the AI part of things that you mentioned there, none of it would be possible without AI. Just like the amount of, just modeling of the environment that's going on, the optimization of, if I'm looking at something, blurring everything out, creating like an artificial depth of field to give my eyes a natural feel when I'm looking around something in VR and AR. None of it possible without the optimizations of AI and machine learning.
I think we talked a bunch about how the tech gets consumed, like how it's used in your home or in your place of business. But I think the other side of that, and you talked about content creation, is that how it's being used to completely change the way we shoot things. Like if you brought up Disney. So if we can talk about the volume for 2 seconds. Like this is fairly new. I mean, it's out there, but it's fairly new tech. Disney's really the only one really using it. But it's for those of you who don't know, it's basically you take a video wall and you wrap your set in the video wall and you also go over the top. And now it's revolutionizing the way movies are shot, because now I can do 90% of everything in camera. And so I'm not fighting with a green screen, and you have to light the green separate to the talent, and you get nice wash off of the environment coming off of the video wall onto a person's face or onto a set piece. So it's totally changing the way large budget action movies are shot, right? And so things are changing rapidly in this space on both sides of the supply chain, really.
And then as well, and just as a follow-on on the training and integration aspect, I really see that as we move forward with the combination of the XR or MR, where you have the person that maybe could be a medic person at an accident scene, and they've got to figure out, okay, they have to save someone's life, and they're looking at the person and go, okay, what vein do I stop? How do I stop the bleeding? Or how do I do this? And hooked up with the AI engines, it assists, and then with the doctor in the background approving the action, there's a lot of possibilities for the future.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. I've worked on law enforcement, like I said. Mostly using AR there. When agents are tactically on the field, to bring them information about the surroundings they are in, right? So it can make a huge difference to save a life or to protect multiple lives. So that's huge, as well as training before the fact. Right? So you cannot go into all the environments to get yourself trained, military situations, law enforcement situations. So those can be simulated. Also, we heard about some space travel and flight simulations and such, right? So those are huge in the training side, because things are expensive, including fuel, right? So how much of flying time can you get with fuel? So before that, if the pilots can get trained.
I think in any line of business, no matter what you're doing, law enforcement, content creation, anything, we always talk about the pathway to mastery is the 7,000 hours, right? All of these technologies, no matter which one we're really talking about, has the capacity to shorten that road for a lot of people. Like, I'm sure, like most of us, I started my career very young, and you know how it is in the production space. You start basically from the time you can walk, right? But not everyone has access to that, or has goes to a school that has those resources, or has parents that have the know-how of the resources. This kind of stuff, as it's eventually sort of out there more broadly, it has the ability to shorten that gap where a person individually or community doesn't have access to a $200,000 cinema camera or whatever, to be able to get to that expertise level much earlier in their life cycle, which could potentially have transformative effects for just humanity in general. Because if we can get people to have expert level knowledge by 20 instead of 40, that could totally change how our society functions.
And one of the other areas of concern is, my military career says, post-traumatic stress, and big problem in the military is training. And how do you prepare someone to be shot at or have an explosion go off next to you? And you need that experience. The Special Forces, U.S. Army Special Forces, they do a very good job of training their people. They put them in situations before they send them into any situation where they know what it feels like to be shot at or near. There's explosions going off. So it builds up their psychological strength to do that, to basically resist that trauma. Whereas a lot of people, in some of the other areas of the Army, they have lesser training. They're more focused on technical. But if their convoy is attacked and now they've got to respond and explosions going on, that creates a lot of trauma because they're not expecting it. They don't know how to deal with it. And I see that using a combination of VR and either MR or and such where the person can physically, they're in a situation and they can physically respond and actually touch things. It comes back, where if you look inside the view thing and you see an object, you can reach down and pick it up and actually touch it. That's what's coming down in the future for training, and it's going to have a lot of benefits in a lot of different areas.
So let's talk about the impacts on society. There can be any new technology coming up, it has impacts, right? Positive, negative impacts. Can we talk about both of them, and if there's anything we need to do now? Now AI, we talk about regulations are needed and all of that. In AR, VR, where are we, and what kind of regulations or things can we do now? Vincent, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I touched on it a moment ago, but I think, shortening the gap between the people who have the knowledge and the people who either want or need the knowledge, I think it changes things from, there's been a lot of articles that have been written about this, but something like over 200 universities have closed this year in the United States for funding reasons, right? And so if you not having to maintain a physical campus, that's millions of dollars right there every single quarter, really. It opens that up, but even you think about something like, I'll tell a story briefly. I see her sitting here in the back, so she's probably gonna give me a hard time about it later, but my daughter, when she's wanted to go into space and she could talk, and I remember, when she was probably about 3 or 4, just having, the Samsung VR headset that was popular at that time, and putting her in the interface and letting her go and interact with some of the things that were taken up at the space station, or some of the other things that are out there. And just somewhere on a cloud drive, I have a video of her with a headset just literally spinning around like this, like a crazy person. But the ability, dreams need nourishing, right? All of us wanted to do things when we were little, and some of us did, and some of us never got there. But if we had the ability to start the learning process earlier and just cultivate that dream with this sense of wonder is what we all need, whether you want to be a professional athlete or a movie star or an astronaut or any just this grand kind of stuff that all kids want. It's going to help. I think it's really going to be transformative in shortening the knowledge gap, but also shortening the divide between all of us regardless of where we're from. Because some places in this world are a lottery ticket. Let's just be honest about that. If you were born in a modern Western developed country versus one that's not, the access to opportunity is significantly better. But then also, like you say, just being able to nourish that seed of a dream, so much earlier in life without having to have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars behind you as a parent, makes it so much easier to allow your child to just explore and experiment with who they want to become. And like I said before, that has the potential to be truly revolutionary for the human race as a whole. And I think you pair that with AI to do all the mundane stuff that none of us want to do. Let's be honest, no one really wants to hand validate Python, right? No one really enjoys doing that. As an editor, no one enjoys building an edit decision list. It's not a fun process. If I could get an AI to do that, so much better.
Anyone else wants to add to societal impact? Tom?
Yeah, I can add some things for sure. Societal impact is definitely, there's lots of positives, like you outlined. There's lots of potential negatives, there's a lot of hypothesis. It's going to be really interesting to see, the psychological and societal impacts of people being in a dictated reality instead of base reality for any extended amount of time. We talk at Polyform a lot about the concept of reality skinning, and that's coming down where if I want to live in the Simpsons hometown, I'll be able to do that in a couple of years and have a headset that just skins everything to look like 2D animation. Everybody that walks by is a Simpsons character. And, that's kind of one extreme. But what if even everybody I walk by is smiling at me or looking approvingly at me and seems friendly instead of just neutral? What kind of implications does that have on people psychologically and from a societal standpoint? And then you get on the VR side of things, and people are already, living in these virtual worlds through their phones. What happens when they're standing inside of a virtual world? And what happens when they're standing inside of that virtual world for the majority of the day or the majority of a year or a decade? And then things start to get totally unpredictable, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but it's going to happen. So we got to just try and build the best version of things now, learn from the mistakes of the past with social media and other things, and try and build this new version of things in a better way.
Well, I think to your point, Adam, is that we're going to see, right?
Yeah.
But I think we know enough about how terrible we can be as humans sometimes, and there have already been cases in the limited amount of VR that is, publicly consumable, of where people have committed crimes against another person's avatar. And so there's a public policy and legislative piece to this as to how one addresses that, because if I'm in the VR space and someone commits a crime against my person, my avatar, whatever, in that space, but I live in New York City and that person lives in, I don't know, China or something, or any other country, then how do we start to deal with the implications of that? Is that person able to be prosecuted? Is there justice? Is there wholeness and healing for the aggrieved party? These are major considerations from the legal standpoint that all of us are old enough to remember when the internet became a thing and how it took 15, 20 years for policy to catch up to simple things like intellectual property and who actually owns the rights, and what happens when you start passing around a movie or a song or a piece of art on the internet, like what happens there. And we're still living in the aftermath of that. The whole NFT thing is a whole separate conversation, but I think so. There's really positive, life-changing implications, but also ones that could be disastrous if we don't do it right and learn from our mistakes in technology, right?
One more thing I'll add is just about safety, maybe children, because virtually we can be anybody, right? We don't know who's who. Yeah, so that's something we'll have to deal with. Okay, just moving on. What are some of the challenges we see? Challenges that we see that we'll have to overcome for these technologies to reach their full potential. Anybody wants to take quickly before we go into some questions?
Really quickly, as Vincent pointed out, policy and regulation and how, just figuring out how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think, of course, there's like a whole that side of things from a practical building standpoint. We've been building in VR for a long time, and it's getting easier, but it's not getting easier at the rate that the hardware and concepts of AR and VR are being adopted. So there's still huge 3D pipeline issues. There's still huge barrier to entry from a skill set situation. You're going to have a whole generation of web designers and 2D mobile designers, UX designers that don't have transferable skill sets to this new era of spatial computing. And there's just massive kind of actual physical person power problems to scaling this whole concept of a MR, AR, VR future.
Well, I think just quickly, I think that it's the same problem that we always have in technology, no matter what it is, whether it's Betamax or Blu-ray or VR, right? It's what's going to be the standard that wins? What's going to be the version of this thing that wins, and how much money is behind it? And do we get to a place of adoption on a thing? Blu-ray always comes to mind. Sony paid a grotesque amount of money to make that happen, and then Netflix happened, right? And then Prime happened, and all these other things happened, and nobody paid attention to Blu-ray. So where do we go there, and where's the gravy train? Who's the entity with the money pushing it to where we all know it inevitably wants to and needs to go, and how long does it take to get there? I think those are the challenges in my mind.
Great thoughts. We'll just give some time for audience questions if anybody has, please.
Well, I think it's really important to have accessibility in your mindset, especially when you're thinking about things like people who have trouble with depth perception, being able to make adjustments on that side, color palettes. I have a visual sensory processing challenges, so a lot of the color palette that's used in VR is painful for me. So I tend not to play in VR just because I don't like it. But on the other spectrum is if you do make it accessible, how amazing it would be for somebody with dyslexia who would be looking through their smart glasses and have all the fonts shift to be friendly towards their difference. Or you were talking about explosions, having ear protectors that would adjust to mute the sound so that it wouldn't penetrate through. And now you don't have to learn how to deal with explosions because the air protector's filtering it out using an AI algorithm. So there's all kinds of different ways you can do to adjust the environment to help people like me who have invisible disabilities.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there about accessibility, and like as a designer, it's something we think about all the time. I'm colorblind myself, so I'm always thinking about it. And there's a really awesome opportunity now where, for the most part, there's really good standards set around basically, you know, any type of accessibility concern in terms of certification or this level or that level or this disability or that other one. And with AI, to be able to, you know, detect maybe what somebody's accessibility challenge is and automatically configure the software instead of it being like a manual process and you have to roll out all these different versions of it, to just be able to make that configuration happen on the fly is something that's like already beginning to happen. And I could see with like advancements in AI and even the advancements of the detections and like things like retinal scanning and stuff that's going on, I'm hoping that'll just keep getting better and better.
Go ahead.
I'll be 100% honest. She stole my question as somebody who's 100% colorblind.
Good question.
First and foremost, thank you, Thomas, Satish, Vincent, and Adam for all the insights and the wisdoms you've imparted in this session. As someone who suffers from colorblindedness, I've recently seen companies such as Enchroma go to market and launch with products to enhance their capabilities. Do you see any other avenues or potential areas of growth, you know, not just from a disability standpoint, but just somewhere outside of the current medical realm of colorblindedness, right? I hope that question was clear. If not, I'm happy to clarify.
I'll jump in there real quick. I think the thing that comes to mind immediately is education, right? And not just from a, hey, we're going to change the world by shortening the knowledge gap, but there are people in this world that we live around every day that have trouble getting out and about for physical reasons. And then there are also people who have learning disabilities who the way their brain is wired precludes them to one degree or another from learning in a way, in the traditional model, right, that we all learned on when we were growing up or going through university, and being able to have something as simple as a pair of glasses or a headset or whatever, and you're immersed in a space where you can converse with others. And the biggest problem we had during the pandemic, right, you talk to teachers and policymakers, was, yeah, we can deliver curriculum, but I'm dealing with, like, during the pandemic, my daughter's 8, she was in kindergarten when everything shut down, trying to figure out how to educate people of differing, you know, ages, differing, you know, neurodivergences. Is now I can customize and leverage AI to look at things and how can we do this better and what's working and not working. And we've had a couple people bring up being colorblind. Well, we all remember the eye test when we were kids. Can you see this number? Can you not see it? That's an easy thing for an AI to do, is to transpose everything that's in the hue of red into something that's much easier for you to do. The same thing goes for auditory processing. If you pretty much every Bluetooth headphone that's on the market has an application to allow you to feel bad about yourself because you're old and you can't hear those frequencies anymore, but will transpose whatever music or sound is being produced by your phone or your iPad into a frequency that you can hear based on not only data on the age range and how that works, but actually testing and kind of the way the voice-to-text stuff used to work in the 90s where you train it, right? So those are immediate applications that are available, could be available today. Right?
I'll just add something very quick. So disabilities, apart from these kind of things, there are people who can't get to physical places and they're missing out. So what we can do here is bring the world to them, right? The virtual world to them. That in itself is huge. Yeah, we're running out of time. I don't know if we can take any more questions. No. Yeah, so I'm told it's no, but please do meet us after the panel and we can answer questions. Very quickly, any closing thoughts, Tom? Okay, I think we've covered everything, and please do reach out. We'll be here after the panel, and thank you, panelists, for these wonderful insights, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.